Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I am excited to introduce you to our guest, Jan Stewart. Jan is a highly regarded mental health governance expert and advocate. She wrote a raw and emotional book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness. And in that book, she discusses the journey of finding the right doctors, diagnoses, and treatments for her children, and how her experience led her to work in mental health governance. I'm so excited she's here with us today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Jan, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm delighted to be here, Karen.
I appreciate so much all the work that you have done and are doing in the area of mental health. And you wrote an incredible book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness. And I just think it's just such an important book. One of the things I was saying to you before we jumped on the call was that, I speak to a lot of mental health professionals, a lot of experts in learning disabilities and mental health, but there is something about having a parent perspective about mental health issues that really can't be described by anyone else other than a parent.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the real reason I wrote the book, I've had many years, as you know, of being on mental health and neurodiversity boards and advisory councils and advocating. And from that, I see so many parents and caregivers who remind me of the early days being frightened, frozen, drained, not knowing where to turn or how, feeling isolated and alone. And that's why I wrote the book. I really want people to understand the unsugar-coated reality, but also I gift readers with key insights to help ease the journey.
Which is so important. I mean, you give an inside the family perspective in managing the mental health issues that many children and young teens and even young adults face, and really how families have to navigate their way through it. You have two children. You talk about Andrew and Ainsley in this book. And what was it about your experience that prompted you to write this book?
Well, as I said, when you live through times of helplessness, of distress, of just trying to get through the day minute by minute. And I'll give you a few examples to make it come alive that are in the book, but come from my own journey. So when Andrew, there had been a number of concerns that our doctor kept discounting, telling me to calm down, which is unfortunately fairly common. And I understand that doctors see a lot of parents who, especially first-time parents, who worry unnecessarily and needlessly about the tiniest little thing. But, it took me years to figure out that I had to trust my gut. That's one of the insights in the book. But all these little signs that we had seen with impulsivity, distractibility, terrible time of dealing with change and transitions, of vocal and motor tics, severe learning disabilities, concrete thinking, couldn't maintain eye contact, the list goes on. Well, shortly after his 9th birthday, we were at my husband David's mother's cottage in the Laurentians, north of Montreal. And Andrew was happily playing one day, and the next day, boom, for no apparent reason, he started this frightening meltdown. And people say, oh, it's a temper tantrum. If you know anything about mental health and neurodiversity, it's anything but a temper tantrum. Lashing out at anything in his way, screaming, ranting, raving, swearing, punching holes in walls, and for up to 2 hours every day, pretty much, for the next number of months. And within a month, He had also started engaging in sudden onset of nonstop compulsive rituals. This was his OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, in which he had terribly distressing, unwanted thoughts that he knew made no sense. That his sister would be kidnapped, that we would be murdered, that he would do something to someone. And he's very gentle and the last person that would ever do anything intentionally to anyone. And those thoughts overrode reason in his brain. Again, he knew it made no sense, but he started engaging in these rituals 24/7. So he couldn't put on clothes, his pants, for well over 30 minutes, couldn't walk out our front door, back and forth for sometimes an hour. And they escalated. He would put a knife in his mouth in order to feel it. And I remember being on the TTC, the subway, going downtown with him in Toronto, and he got down on all fours in the crowded subway and started gnawing the floor. Well, let me tell you, you can imagine how you felt as a parent.
Right.
And his younger sister, Ainsley, who's 2 years younger. So she was showing very different concerning signs. Andrew was rule bound. He was a behavioral dream. She was just the opposite. Disruptive, couldn't sit still in class, shouted out, interrupted others. Every day almost she was sent to the principal's office. And then this came with overwhelming anxiety that she still battles today, years later, as well as the inability to read her friends' social cues. So she lost all her friends. I remember coming home from work one day and she was curled up in a corner on our couch. And she said, "Mom, why don't I have any friends?" And your heart just goes out. So we'd been looking, as I said, for years, and our doctor had discounted. But the oddly fortunate part is that the kids were now so severe, the symptomology and the behavior, that they were finally fully diagnosed. So Andrew has autism, Tourette syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, and learning disabilities. And Ainsley also has Tourette syndrome, ADHD, and learning disabilities, along with severe mood and anxiety disorders. They were in such deep distress that I promised them, "I will not settle until I find you the right help. This is not your fault." And picked myself up, didn't know what I was doing, but propelled forward and just refused to take no. And we can go through what I did if you'd like, Karen, but that's the journey to today that when I look back on, and through all my advocacy work, I was previously vice chair at Canada's leading psychiatric hospital, CAMH. I currently chair the largest autism services provider in this country, Carey's Place Autism Services, fantastic organization. I've been on Mass General Hospital's Department of Neuropsychopharmacology's Parent Advisory Council, and the list goes on. So many parents and caregivers have reached out from those activities. And as I said, I remember, and that's why I wrote the book. I want to inspire and empower anyone touched by mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders to persevere, have hope.
And so much of what you have just said and so much that is in your book really speaks to that desire that you have to really empower and support other parents. Because one of the things that struck me, and there's so many things that struck me, was that, it wasn't until things got severe that your children were able to get diagnosed and to get identified. And you discuss in your book the experience that many families have about the delay in finding out why your child is struggling. Why are they behaving in this way? And also getting dismissed where, well-meaning professionals rationalize the behaviors that they see. They say that you're overreacting. They say that, again, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, that your child will grow out of it. He's just a boy. She's just a girl. That's how boys are. There's no need to worry. I've seen this before. And it's this wait and see approach. And then when you wait and see, oftentimes you get this exacerbation of all of the symptoms because these issues have not been addressed for such a long period of time. And now kids are in crisis. And that's when they get the support.
That's exactly right. And that's why I said we were oddly fortunate when these burst forward suddenly to such severity that we were able to gain the clarity. And I do think there's some good news. I don't know if you agree with me, but Organizations in Toronto, like Holland Bloorview, have been doing a lot of leading edge work, training community and family doctors for screening, particularly of autism and neurodevelopmental issues. And they're finding much greater awareness and ability to screen. We still obviously have a long way to go, and there's still these terrible stories out there, but I do hope it's getting better.
I agree. I do believe it's getting better. And, you know, we've talked before, on this podcast about screens and how important they are, but they are just a first step, because once you screen and you identify something, then what, right? Parents need the support to be able to know what to do once a screen identifies either a child is at risk for something or is showing symptoms of a particular, you know, neurodivergent presentation, and have a good understanding. I think that's one of the things you do so well, is that not only are you providing support and guidance for parents, but you're educating parents. And you even talk about in your book, you know, how important it is when other professionals can kind of rally around and see what you see and provide the support. I think you talk about Andrew's fourth grade teacher, who was that person who saw him and connected with him and was able to, and so many parents are waiting for their children to have that experience with that person who will get them and understand them and lead them to the right support.
Well, you just said something very interesting to me, and that you said many parents are waiting for. This is one of my key lessons. Stop waiting for. Take as much control as you can, even though, like me, you don't know what you're doing. Now, I'll stop for a minute and give you a little disclaimer. I'm very fortunate as a woman of privilege. I'm white. I'm heterosexual. Our family's been able to afford the very steep costs that come with raising neurodivergent children. But that said, the insights and life lessons in the book and that we're discussing are universal. It doesn't matter if you're struggling financially or not, if you're single or married, crosses all race, religions, culture, ethnicities, gender identity, list goes on. So I want to just park that, because I've heard people say, well, you were able to afford it. You have an MBA. You have this great job. Yes, and maybe I was wired that way, but these insights are key. And so from what you said, let's not wait. There are two things that I think you need to insist on and do. And the first is to embrace research. I mean, if I tell you Tourette syndrome, that wasn't part of my vocabulary before. Autism? Does that mean you're banging your head against the wall? You know, I didn't have the knowledge. And so it went. OCD, you're washing your hands until they're bleeding, or you're very tidy. These are all misnomers, of course. They're part of it, but they're just a little part of it. So I started reading everything that I could. Classic books. I still read. There are many newer books now, videos on each of these disorders. David and I started attending parent support groups. In our case, we attended 3 different ones for ADHD, for autism, and for Tourette syndrome. There was no parent support group at the time for OCD in Toronto. So I actually approached, this is taking control, Andrew's psychiatrist. And I said, let's create one at Sick Kids. And we did. And for me, it was and continues to be so reaffirming to meet other parents and caregivers of similar children. Just strengthens my emotional fortitude, helps me think through issues, and vice versa. So we're all there in it together to help each other. So that's the research side. By the way, you have to take breathers from time to time, because there is the law of diminishing returns, but there are always new findings, new treatments, medications, whatever. So you must stay current. And my kids are grown now, and I continue to do this. So that's the research piece. The other piece that I think is such an overarching lesson that I learned to help you take that control and steer your family's ship as much as you can is to insist on an integrated partnership approach with every individual involved in your child's care. This crosses all facets of their lives. So to this day, I make sure that both my kids, psychiatrists and psychologists, communicate with each other so they can adjust their medication and therapeutic approaches accordingly. The kids' schools, Andrew's school sent notes home every afternoon about his day, and we sent them back the following morning. So we were in constant communication. And Ainsley's school had monthly group meetings with her principal, her teachers, her external psychologist, and David and me, so that we could try to develop and implemented coordinated strategies for both at home and at school, so it would carry through her life. Didn't always work, but she stayed in school, and eventually it did. And then later, when your child grows up, it applies to employers as well. That word partnership. There are some professionals, and I hear it all the time, healthcare professionals and others, if they don't respect me and treat me as a core member of their team, I go elsewhere.
And I think that's really important. Again, that coordinated strategy is so key because you need to get input from your child's team. And that team includes teachers. It includes anyone who's doing any kind of therapeutic intervention, and it includes the parents. Parents need to get feedback in terms of how their children are responding to the interventions, responding to the treatments, how that ties to their ability to access their curriculum at school. And we need to constantly tweak and fine tune the interventions as your child responds to them in different ways and as they grow and develop. And I'm wondering how much of that collaborative, those efforts were spearheaded by you. It seems that parents really have to be actively engaged in this process. It's not a wait and see for the teachers to set up that meeting. It sounds like you really need to be the one driving that.
Without a doubt. And I understand when you have a child in crisis and you're just trying to get through, as I said, minute by minute the day, and you're exhausted and frightened. It's very hard to do that. But you have to pick yourself up. And that doesn't always last at that high crisis level. Once it dips a little, then pick yourself up, renew yourself, and get out there. I called every mental health organization, agency that I could at the time to ask, who would you use? Do you have a parent support group? I'd ask all kinds of questions. I probably spoke to 10 or 20 of them, in addition to reading the videos and the parent support groups. And when I couldn't reach someone that I wanted to reach, I got on the subway and I sat outside their office, and I've done it. Again, sometimes it works more effectively than others, but they know you're serious. And usually it's how you do it. You want to be tenacious. You don't want to be aggressive, overly aggressive. The key is to put yourself in the person's shoes. Many of the providers are so overwhelmed with their own workloads, as you know, Karen, that there's no time, and it's hard for them too. But if they know you're in it together, it really helps a great deal. I mean, you come at it from the other side, so you see parents and caregivers who are proactive and others who are just believing everything you say and sitting back passively.
Right. I mean, you and your family have gone through this roller coaster. As I was reading your book, you're finding nuggets of hope, and then you're finding the right support and treatment team, and then there's downward spirals even after you've intervened. What are some things that have been helpful for you and your family during your journey? You talked about finding that community of parents whose children are experiencing similar symptoms and behaviors. What are some other things that have been helpful for you and your family during your journey?
Well, I think one of the most important things is related to Andrew and Ainsley themselves, and that was we learned very early to talk openly with them. This is extremely difficult for many parents. Children, even if they don't ask for help, when they're frightened, and they are frightened when they're causing pain and havoc at school or at home, they want help, so give it to them. And what that means is sit down with them, listen. Not one of my strengths, I try, and let them know they're valued and understood. I tell a number of stories in the book that were quite shocking to me and to David. Coming home, I opened the book with a story of coming home from work one cold February snowy evening and finding Ainsley sobbing uncontrollably in the snow outside, barefoot in just her nightgown, because Andrew had started having one of those frightening meltdowns. And it was a wake-up call. So those are the kind of things you have to say, it's okay, I understand. I'm going to get you the right help. So important to talk openly with your kids. And by the way, one of my bugaboos is don't hide or avoid information. Of course, you want to talk an age-appropriate level to your kids, but particularly about medications, let them know. Don't call them special vitamins. I know some parents, I said, I don't want to single them out, make them feel different. I want them to take the medications. Involve them, educate them, empower them. And as they grow older, they can then take on as much of a role as they're capable of. So that was one thing that really helped. Those partnerships, again, absolutely key. The advocacy for me has been very key, not only for me to help the broader community, because that's my raison d'etre, my calling now, but you get so much back in return. And you continually learn. I was just commenting the other day, I write a monthly column for Today's Parent on autism. Also, I wrote, I'll write about other conditions as well. I just wrote about OCD last month because it was OCD Awareness Week. And I have the opportunity to interview wonderful experts like you, and your article on holiday tips will be coming out in just about 10 days, I think, and other experts around North America. And I learn so much every time. So that continual learning is very key to stay current. I think that's an important tip. There's just so much we can do. I think you also have to protect yourself, and it took me a while to learn this. Certain family and friends can be very hurtful and upsetting, and I know they come from the heart, particularly family members. They're not out to get you, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. When Andrew, after 9 months of these daily meltdowns, and I felt like I was in the twilight zone, his developmental pediatrician at the time found a life-saving antipsychotic medication. And when I say that medication stopped his meltdowns in their tracks, within 2 days, the meltdowns were gone. He continues to take that medication today. It's just fantastic for him. Doesn't always work for everyone, but there's some severe side effects with that medication. And he started to gain 3 pounds a week. He was very thin, and so we were lucky, and it stopped in his case after 6 weeks. But I do know children who have gained 60, 70 pounds and more on it. And my mother, who is my closest friend in the world and who I thought understood everything, said to me, "You don't want a fat child." And it just destroyed me at the time. I thought, how could she not understand? And on David's side, he has a relative to this day who clearly disapproves, thinks it's our parenting that has caused these. And if we were just stricter, the kids would be just fine, even though they're grown now. So what you have to learn to do is to navigate and limit your engagement with those family members. You have to realize that they really are trying to help, but they may be misinformed, particularly those that think they have all the answers. Those are the ones that I particularly shake my head at. And by the way, that role models it for Andrew and Ainsley too, so that they learn we're not going to engage in a no-win discussion about my co-occurring conditions, my disorders. It just isn't a win. And these particular family members aren't open to education. And with friends, I had to learn to shed those that just weren't there for me and supportive. Andrew's one of his closest friends. We had become, we thought, friends with his parents. They were school friends. And one day, in Andrew's deepest distress, they pulled their son from the friendship. And so I immediately picked up the phone and called, and I said, "Is everything okay?" "Oh, yes. Jason is just too dependent on Andrew." Well, they then backed off from our friendship too. And it was extremely upsetting. But I processed it and I said, get rid of them. I don't have the energy and the reserves to deal with anyone that I don't have to, that's not there for me. And again, it's those other parents of neurodivergent kids who have formed this wonderful community. Now, of course, there are other longstanding friends that stay by you, and the right friends know how to ask, how can I support you?
And that's just such a topic that doesn't get discussed enough, right? Because there's so much misunderstanding about kids who are neurodivergent, who are struggling with mental health issues. You brought up the issue. It must be something about your parenting that is causing those behaviors. And those perceptions exist. But the other thing you said is that, your job is to protect your family, to educate your family, to educate your children on the struggles that they're facing and protecting them, because we want to be able to protect our children and provide them with a sense of safety, particularly because there's so much isolation for kids who are neurodivergent, who are struggling with mental health challenges. There's often a lack of this social connectivity, and we need to enhance their feeling of belonging. And the way we do that is by supporting them and surrounding our families with people we know who can also support them and lift them up.
Yeah, it's not easy. And I always remind families, you just need one friend. That's all. Many people don't have that. And that has nothing to do with mental illness or neurodevelopmental disorders. Many neurotypical people don't have friends. So if you have one special friend, you're fortunate.
Jan, you've used your experiences to advocate for understanding about mental health issues, understanding about learning disabilities. But there's so much, I feel like there's so much work that still needs to be done. We've talked about how, things have improved. And I completely agree with you. There's an increased understanding about autism, about Tourette's, about ADHD. There's more information getting into the hands of families. And I know that you have learned a lot about how the system can work better. There are some things that we are learning that society needs to do to invest in to support young people. What are your thoughts on some key things that we need to do as a society to support young people who struggle even early on with learning disabilities and mental health challenges?
So I think this is multi-layered, Karen. So there's society, there's government, there's educators, but if we talk as a broad society, and we have a responsibility, I think, to get the facts out. And this is tied to stigma and discrimination. To me, if the more we can shout out about mental health and neurodiversity, the better, but with facts, not myths. Autism is not caused by vaccines, and ADHD, as we just said, by lax parenting, and it goes on. So that's number one. Obviously, as a society, we need more supports. There's not a shortage of healthcare providers and professionals, not only psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, PSWs, the whole bit, and they're long wait lists. So we have to systemically make some changes in that regard. But it goes beyond that. It also involves a mind shift in our mental health system, that the system is still too geared to the provider rather than to the family. And that's a very important shift. So again, as a parent or caregiver, we have a responsibility to help us get there. But society, of course, and you read about this in the papers and you hear about it on the news all the time. Homelessness is very tied to mental health and addictions as well. But all these issues we need more services and supports, whether it is more housing, whether it's navigating our mental health care system easier. It's very complex. About 10, 15 years ago, it was clear that Andrew, who was becoming a young adult, he can't responsibly take care of himself. Ainsley can. And not every individual needs either a legal guardianship or a power of attorney, but Andrew does. It's quite an onerous process. Lots of documentation, long forms to fill out. You have to apply to the courts. And it goes from there. And for a parent that's dealing with all these other issues, it just sometimes is so much to deal with. There's just a lot we can do. I'm delighted to see the police across the country talking more and more about mental health supports. Doesn't have to be police officers themselves, but mental health teams, whether they're nurses or professionals that would pair with them. And that's for children as well. There are all kinds of things that we can do. Now, one of the biggest gaps in our system, children today, there are more and more services up to the age of 18. And then there's services a little later, but there's that gap often between 18 and 30. What do you do? So I know at Carrie's Place, the board I chair, that's a big area of focus, and we're adding services and supports. On top of that, with this greater awareness, and it's not just understanding, it's acceptance that we have to push and propel that forward. If we're going to be a truly inclusive and belonging society, we have to think broadly about cultural sensitivity and responsiveness. A lot of people have said to me, just in the autism field, well, gee, there used to be 1 in 66 children and youth who were diagnosed as autistic, and the latest stat says 1 in 36. Why are there so many more autistic kids? I don't think there are. There's greater awareness, there's better screening, and the marginalized, racialized communities are the ones that are coming up much more because they've been hidden in the background, and now that awareness is growing, and it's wonderful to see. But there's certain, you look at diagnostic tools. They're based on our Western culture, and there's certain cultures that don't do what we do. And in fact, there are only, I think, 3 or 4 languages that use the word autism as an example. There's also great shame still in many third world countries. So all those things, we have a responsibility to come together and get the word out. Media also, it's gotten better, but there's still far too much association of evil characters with mentally ill. And even the word mental illness has such a negative connotation, where physical illness does not.
Right. And those are just such important things. And it feels so big, Jan. It feels like there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's absolutely doable. And I think, like we've been saying, we're making progress. We're making progress at the government level. In a lot of places have adopted universal screenings for autism, for anxiety, for dyslexia. We're seeing the expansion of those early screenings. We're seeing increased support in schools for mental health issues. I'd love to see more than that because I still think that there isn't enough support in school systems. There needs to be more integration of mental health support into school systems. And again, we really have to destigmatize these mental health struggles, destigmatize learning disabilities and neurodivergence. And I think that's happening. I think that's happening more and more. And I really think that COVID helped us in that regard. COVID brought a lot of negative things to our society and to our world, but it really uncovered a lot of these mental health challenges, a lot of these learning disabilities, a lot of these neurodivergent presentations, and we became more empathetic. And we had a desire to understand, a desire to provide support and to meet people where they are. And we had a better understanding of the disparities that exist in our society.
I fully agree with you. But at the same time, I also want to caution, if you're like me, I post, for instance, every day on Instagram about mental health and neurodiversity. And I often see other parents of neurodivergent children post what I call toxic positivity. My children have superpowers. There's endless joy in raising my children. I don't think those are helpful. There's not endless joy in raising any child, neurotypical or neurodivergent, especially when they're teenagers or, we all have bad days, and some of us have more than just a day or two that's bad. And children don't have superpowers. Children with challenges, if they have, like Andrew and Ainsley, unbelievable, breathtaking grit and determination and will, that's what makes them special. But it's not a superpower.
Jan, do you have any additional words of wisdom for parents? I'm thinking about the fact that we're heading into the holidays and parents are going to be home with their kids. Many of those kids might be struggling with their own mental health issues. Any words of wisdom for parents who are currently working with their kids to address their mental health challenges? It sounds like persevere is really important for them.
Absolutely. Persevere. Know that, it's not easy. Know that it is going to potentially, depending on your child, be an endless roller coaster. And I always remind myself when I'm in distress that we're going to climb out of it. And I try to enjoy the good times because I also know that's not going to last. You have to be pragmatic and realistic, but have that hope. We talked about steering the ship as much as you can. We all have a choice in life to either embrace it or defeat it. And I hope everyone chooses to embrace it because that's how you get your power. And that's how you can complement yourself, which is so important on being your child's champion.
Jan, thank you so much for all the work that you do. It's just a delight to have you here today. I appreciate all the work you do to educate parents, to empower them, to inspire them, to persevere. What is the best way for parents, professionals, educators to connect with you if they'd like to learn more about your work, learn more about your advocacy efforts?
Well, first of all, I'd be absolutely delighted to connect with anyone, and I've greatly enjoyed this conversation, Karen, so thank you. So first of all, my book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness, which I'm thrilled has been honored with the Mom's Choice Award.
Congratulations.
It is widely available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, Caversham booksellers if you're in Toronto, which if you don't know, Caversham is the preeminent mental health psychology bookstore across North America. So that's the book. I have a website, janstewartauthor.com. Similarly, I post on Instagram every day under that moniker, Jan Stewart Author. You can reach out to me there, and I always get back to everyone. I mean, we're here to help each other and to move the mental health agenda forward.
Wonderful. And I'll be sure to put all that information in the show notes so that people can connect with you directly, and definitely a link to your book, which I am holding right here, which is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jan.
Oh, thank you, Karen. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about Jan and her work. And be sure to go to childnexus.com and check out all of the resources we have available to families. They include mini courses, the opportunity to book consultations, blog articles, and of course, our podcast episodes. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.